So this is chapter 14, the presidency in action. And so when we talk about the presidency and the way that it's transformed over the last almost 250 years now at this point, I think it's important that we go back, we look at some of the historical models and specifically some of the presidents and situations that have happened that have affected the way our presidency looks today. If we were to go back and look at George Washington or even John Adams' presidencies, we would view that position much differently than what it is today. So I showed Andrew Jackson just a moment ago to represent a little bit about the growth of the presidential power. And with this particular chapter, you guys have already done the big idea worksheets, and so I'm going to ask a little bit more of your involvement, as well as I'm not going to go quite as in depth here in our conversation. You guys are living out a lot of this in your campaigns and your elections. You guys have done a lot of digging and research already, and so I just want to hit some of the highlights here. And for that reason, you're not going to see quite as much stuff up on the screen for this particular section, but I would encourage you to ask some questions as we come around here, and if there's anything that you'd like for me to dig in a little bit deeper, then please let me know. So we're going to begin here talking about Andrew Jackson. Why was he perhaps one of the greatest examples of the growth of presidential power? Why would I have chosen him? Josh?
In the video, it said he changed a lot. Like he made his friends like high government officials.
Yeah, he definitely changed a lot in the presidency. What do we call that system where he made his friends government officials? The spoil system. That was something that he was pretty well known for. Not a whole lot of people thought that was a good thing. However, it sets a precedent for many others in the future that are going to reward individuals who have helped them get to where they are with certain positions in their campaign or in their government. Why else would we choose Andrew Jackson as a symbol of the growth of the presidency?
He did things that none of the other presidents had done before, like going against a ruling of the Supreme Court and just acting independently of the other branches of government.
Yeah, and you're exactly right as far as him acting independently. So what nickname did he get?
King.
Yeah, King. King Andrew. King Andrew the First. Because many people viewed him as he was more of a king than he was a president because he didn't respect or honor the other branches of Congress the way that previous presidents had done. And so for many presidents before him, the power of the presidency kind of rose and fell based on their leadership. Andrew Jackson took it and he actually put into practice a lot of powerful acts and precedents that some followed afterwards. Now, not everybody did. But there are a number of reasons why we see growth in presidential power and why the president's position gets bigger and bigger as time goes on. One of the reasons for this growth is the fact that presidents are trying to unify the country and unify the office itself. They're trying to help future presidents understand this is the role that you need to fill, and here are some of the responsibilities that you have as the President of the United States. And the President himself, he has the power and the ability to execute his powers at any time, place, or whenever he feels like it. He doesn't have to wait for Congress to get together. He doesn't have to have a big meeting like the Supreme Court does. He can just make a decision at any point, any time. He also has the power to deal with war in Congress all on his own. And so, war in crisis, excuse me, not Congress, war in crisis. So when it comes time for any sort of national emergency, he can step right in and he can make a decision. And typically when that happens, the American people are going to rally around the president. And if he makes a decision, whether it's within his powers or not, they're going to say, yeah, support the president, support the United States, USA. For most of us in our lifetime, we're familiar with George W. Bush, and we're familiar with some of the things that he did after 9/11. He created a new cabinet position, really without the authorization of Congress, and he just went ahead and did it. And he also authorized the movement of troops, and he shut down our airline systems, shut down the skies after 9/11 without Congress's authorization. I mean, that he took a lot of power on that day, but everybody said, okay, yeah, right move. Good, yes, we support the president. Fast forward about 7 years later, and now people are really questioning George W. Bush and his leadership skills. And it just, the people are fickle, and that's just kind of the way the masses work. But when it comes time for crisis or war, some of the nation's strongest presidents have been wartime or crisis presidents. You think about the presidents that you think of in your mind as being some of the most famous or most well-known. FDR, wartime president. Crisis president. You have both. We have Lincoln. We have Washington. We have Washington being a crisis president, getting us through the first few years of our new government. Even when you think about Ronald Reagan, he's often thought of as a strong president. He had crisis to deal with. He also had Russia to deal with, Soviet Union at that point. So sometimes these war and crisis can bring about more growth in presidential power. We also can look at one of the other reasons is that we have more and more demands on our president every single year. And it seems like every time we have a new president, the American people are demanding more of him and are asking him to do more things than previous presidents in the past. And sometimes that comes through their campaigns where they promise all kinds of things they really can't do. Thank you, candidates, for not promising things that you're not able to do in your speeches. You did well skirting around that issue. Well done. So I think those are some of the main reasons here, and I hit that sufficiently. There's at least two major views on presidential power. We've talked about these at length in other branches of government and other areas of the Constitution. So when we are interpreting the Constitution, there are two different ways we can do it. Give me one of them. Perspective on the Constitution. How do we view the Constitution? Max?
There's like the stewardship theory.
Okay, stewardship theory. Can you explain that a little bit more? How would you help us understand stewardship?
The American people have chosen you to be their executive leader, and you need to do whatever you can to make sure that you can do the best for them. So you do whatever it takes to do the best for them.
Yeah, good explanation. Do whatever it takes to do the best for the American people. They elected you, so as their representative, you're going to do whatever it takes. David?
When looking at the powers that a president could have from the Constitution, it comes into play the strict and liberal constructionism. And strict would be the president only has the exact powers that the Constitution allows, and then liberal being like as the powers to do what Max was saying, just do what is beneficial for the people, regardless of it's specifically stated in the Constitution.
Good. And I think that it's important we understand each of those things these guys are saying, that the stewardship view here is more of the loose or liberal constructionist view of, I'm going to take whatever powers necessary in order to do what the people have authorized me to do, to serve as their president. So if that means that I need to go beyond the Constitution just a little bit, or I need to read between the lines of the Constitution, I'm going to take that approach because I'm doing what's best for the interests of the people. On the flip side, we've talked about the strict interpretation of the Constitution already. And so the people who take that approach are going to say, well, I'm going to hold the Constitution. I'm not going to do anything outside of what the Constitution specifically allows me to do. Even if I know it's in the best interest of the people, I'm just going to stay straight and narrow. I don't want to make a mistake. I think there's good arguments on both sides, and I think that there's valid points on either direction. I think finding a good balance is really where you ought to be. I think that there were a lot of presidents in the early 20th century, like William Howard Taft, that would have taken that secondary view of very strict view of the Constitution. I'm not going to do anything outside the box. I don't want to mess anything up. I think we could also look at Herbert Hoover as well, leading up to the Great Depression, not wanting to do anything that would abuse his power, but at the same time didn't really do anything to help the American people. So, as we get in here to executive powers, these are some of the things that the president has the ability to do in executing the law. According to President Jefferson, if you read carefully, you would have read this quote as well in your book, that the execution of the laws is more important than the making of them. And clearly he took some liberty in the way that he governed as president as well, and he executed those laws very liberally. So one of the powers the president has is the ordinance power, more commonly known today as executive orders. So presidents have the ability to interpret the laws the way that they want to, but that's not really their job. Their job is to execute those laws. And so they have some discretion there as to how they're going to enforce, how they're going to interpret those laws. And executive orders are one of those things that they have. What does an executive order mean for us? How does that impact us? President Trump has signed many of them. They're in the news all the time. So what does executive order mean for us? Charlie, what do you think?
Means that we might have a wall near Mexico.
Okay, it means that could happen. All right. What else? What else do you think an executive order means? And maybe you could contrast it with a law, or how is it different from a law, rather than why don't we just write a law about a wall going up in Mexico somewhere? Also, what do you think? Is it as powerful as a law? Hope, does the president have the power to write a law?
Chief legislator.
What?
Chief legislator.
Does he have the power to write a law and put it into
No.
law form? No. So therefore, if he writes an executive order, does this have the same weight as a law? No. So it has the same force, so it can be enforced like a law, but it does not have the same authority. Maybe I'm wording this incorrectly. Maybe I need to go back and reword this. To the fact that it does allow the president to be able to put things into the same realm as a law, but it's not officially a law. Maybe that's the way I'm trying to say that. Does that make better sense? No? Yes?
I kind of.
Chance gets it. Charlie kinda. Okay. So when he signs an executive order, has this been approved by Congress? No. The president signs it in and of himself. According to our Constitution, the laws that are binding and the laws that are made for our country, they have to be signed into place by both houses of Congress and then authorized by the president. So if it doesn't go through that system, then is it a full-blown law like one that would go through the traditional lawmaking process? Not necessarily. David, you have something you found in there that you were wanting to comment on?
Yeah, it was just talking about how, like, as you're saying, the executive orders do not go through the normal law process, and so by definition they're not a law, but an executive order is something that the president issues that has the effect of a law and can be enforced as such.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's where I was trying to get to. I probably was not wording that as well as I should have. So they do have the same force as a law. They can be executed as a law, but here's the drawback. It's only one branch of government that has authorized that. And it's going, in a way, it's going around the system. It's very much a loose interpretation of the Constitution type of power that he has in order to be able to do that. This is why Donald Trump has received so much heat for the executive orders that he's put in place. Many people would argue against him, and they would say, you need to go through Congress in order to pass some of these laws regarding our immigration, as well as our travel ban. They're just not a big fan of what Donald Trump is doing with those. They think he's taking too much power in himself. Any questions on that? I know that's a big issue today, this executive order. So he can issue those for a number of reasons. We're not going to go into all of those, but he cannot write an executive order that contradicts Congress. So he can't say, I disagree with Congress, I'm going to write my own executive order that will override or overrule them, because that doesn't work. And they're not going to allow that. The president also has the ability to appoint people into office. This is his power to appoint high-ranking officers or candidates into positions for our government to operate. So his secretaries to the cabinet are all appointed. He also can authorize the appointment of federal agencies like the FBI, NASA. Some of those federal judges are also on that list of people he can appoint. Ambassadors, diplomats. Now, all of those appointments have to go through approval through which body? Which organization? The Senate. So the Senate has to approve everybody that Donald Trump appoints to his particular government agency. And if the Senate is on the same side as the president, typically those nominations go through with no problem. If the Senate is represented by a different political party, it often makes it much more difficult to get that through. There are times where, and I don't think I put this up on the screen, let me just double check. Yeah, I did not. Yes, ma'am. Yep. There are times where the president can bypass this. So I would include in your notes here, or put in your mind, the idea of recess appointments. So a recess appointment is where the president can appoint somebody while the Senate is in recess. So they're out of the Senate at that point. And in order to get government rolling and get it moving, he makes a temporary appointment that's not been approved by the Senate. And therefore, that person gets to immediately take office until the Senate reconvenes and comes to their next session. That appointment does expire then, that temporary appointment, then they have to go through the formal process. So it's like a Band-Aid for the approval process. Congress really does not like this when the president does it. They get pretty angry if he tries to do that, because typically it's the president does this on purpose when he knows that this particular person's never going to get approved. And so he'll specifically appoint them during a Senate recess session so that he can have them for 3 or 4 months, whatever it may be. Yes?
Is it, is that temporary appointment valid through the end of the session or the end of the term?
I believe it's the end of the session. You could double check that for me if you see differently, but I think that we get to the end of that session, it's got to restart, and I think it expires. If you see differently, let me know. Now, the president also has the power to remove. He has the power to appoint. He also has the power to remove people from office. And the big argument comes into play here when we're talking about removing somebody from a government position. Should the Senate be involved in his removal? And some would argue yes, because they were the ones to approve. And others would argue no, that's just going to slow Congress down. And the president should be able to fire anybody out of his cabinet that he wants to at any point, anytime. This is what got Andrew Johnson into trouble. So, go back here. Andrew Johnson got caught up in a tricky law that Congress passed was called the Tenure of Office Act, and they wanted to make it a law where the Senate had to approve anybody that was removed from office by the president. And Johnson did not agree to this. He did not think it was legal. He fired a cabinet member without authorization from the Senate, and that's part of what led to his impeachment. And I'm not going to go down that whole road right now, but I do know we have a couple of people that are researching Andrew Johnson. Maybe you would find out a little bit more about that. But as a general rule, the president can fire anybody he wants to. He can remove anybody from office except for federal judges. Those he cannot fire anybody there. He cannot fire the Supreme Court because that's considered a breach of the balance of power. So anybody else that he appoints, he can also remove from office. Presidents have also claimed executive privilege.
Mr. Jones.
Yep.
Before we move on to
Yep.
the next one.
What'd you find?
It said, any such appointment automatically expires at the end of the congressional term in which it is named.
Okay. So it would be pretty temporary, but could be
2 years.
it could be up to 2 years, right? And so that's why Congress does not like that, and they get pretty frustrated if the president tries to take advantage of that. It's like a loophole in the system there. So some presidents, they will argue that they have a constitutional privilege called executive privilege, that they do not have to disclose certain information about their presidency or conversations they're having. Richard Nixon is probably the most famous for claiming executive privilege on this, as he audio recorded every single conversation in the White House. Then when it was found out that some of those conversations may have incriminating evidence about his knowledge or authorization of the attack or the break-in at the Watergate Hotel, he claimed executive privilege. He didn't have to hand over all those tapes, or that some of those tapes were missing and he didn't know anything about it. Well, he really did. So most of the time, Congress is willing to respect this, unless there is some legitimate reason that they believe they need to be aware of all the conversations or the information the president is trying to withhold. But it's one of those kind of unwritten things. It's not specifically outlined in the Constitution, where Congress is going to respect privacy there of the president for the time being.